Hey everybody, my name is Ian O'Byrne. I'm the current Multi-Literacies Department Editor for the Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy. This latest column is on coding and programming and computational participation and computational thinking. We're trying to unpack what it means to include coding and programming in instruction, what works and what doesn't work, and what you need to consider. With each of these columns, we've been putting together content in the journal, the print journal that you can read online, but we've been having interviews that go along with and supplement the column to bring out some of the nuances associated with this that we don't really have a chance to pull out in the column itself. So with that being said, while I was getting ready for these interviews, I saw a post by Richard, and so I'm really stoked to have him and spend some time with him. So Richard, you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi Ian, thank you for having me. Yes, I guess going right back, I'm not going to show my age, 20 years or so ago, I did train initially as a programmer and work as a programmer, so I am biased before I headed off into teaching. And then after a number of years, I decided to go and retrain as a teacher. So I taught in schools for 8 years in classroom roles and also in leadership roles, in ICT, technology leadership roles. Then I went to the Department of Education here in Melbourne, Victoria, and worked with a digital incubating lab called Ideas Lab. And we basically had the mission statement to look at cool things in technology around what does it mean to work in one-to-one environments, student laptop environments. And a lot of that was programming. Actually worked with Bruce Dixon, who's a world leader in one-to-one. He was the director of Ideas Lab. He brought Papert out in the 80s and 90s, I think, or in the 90s. He was involved in the first one-to-one school anywhere in the world, which is MLC here in Melbourne in the 90s. So Bruce had a real passion for one-to-one and for Papert's ideas and logo, and really introduced, although I had played with News Microworlds as a classroom teacher, Bruce really introduced me to those ideas in a big way. And Bruce actually was a programmer before he became a teacher as well, so we had that common love of programming as well. And when I finished at Ideas Lab, I'm now actually doing my PhD looking at pedagogical innovation and how teachers become pedagogical innovators at Monash University, and I'm hoping to finish that this year, fingers crossed. So I've had a pretty varied career over the last 20 years, but I've enjoyed most of it.
No, it's good. It sounds like it primed you for this, place. It's I wish I would have had the opportunity to get the coding and programming skill set before I went into the classroom. It make my life easier now.
Yeah, it's changed remarkably. Showing my age, I did my programming degree from 89 to 91, and the web wasn't around then, and programming was very different to what we have today.
That's awesome. You're at the advent of everything.
Not quite, but
so when you talk to teachers, when you talk to teachers, you talk to educators, you talk to other individuals about coding, programming. How do you define it? What is your quote unquote like elevator pitch? Like, what are the words that you use?
I think my elevator pitch is that coding allows us to simplify things and to find problems and I guess to understand. So if I've got a problem personally, because I have a background in coding, if I've got a problem and it's got to do with data, it's got to do with finding information, one of the first things I'll do is say, can I understand this with code? Some people like to write things down and get their thoughts organized. Some people like to draw things, and I'm not talking about learning styles here, but I'm talking about how do we use tools to simplify problems. And coding and programming as an environment is a really powerful tool for simplifying complex problems and I guess finding answers to them. And I think, to me, that is really at the heart of learning, being able to do that.
Well, that's one of the challenges. We in many classrooms, we're more concerned with product as opposed to process. We don't provide time for students to think through the problem solving process and document multiple ways to find that and make it simpler. So I talked earlier about the post that you had that really inspired me and wanted me wanted me to find an opportunity to reach out to you. What gets you excited about thinking about coding or programming embedded in instruction? You know, why should it have a place in instruction? What are some of the positives, and what are some concerns that you might have?
It's as a learning environment, I just think it's completely powerful. You know, Papert, we can't talk about coding without talking about Papert. You know, when he invented, you know, Logo, and then that became microworlds when I was using it in my classrooms. You know, he saw that as an environment to explore mathematical concepts. You know, you move the turtle around and you could actually explore shapes, as opposed to a triangle is 3 sides, or a, you know, whatever. And so enable us to explore geometry. What happens is enable us to explore angles. And in one way, it's no different to what we've already known about that. You know, like you only have to go to 1930 to hear Vygotsky talking about why play was such a wonderful environment. You know, we know for young children, for example, play, they can experience emotions that they can't experience, or that they don't normally experience. You know, we read a fairy tale and they have empathy and they get scared for the character, and they talk about victory, and they understand about how right powers over wrong, and they get a chance to explore these motivations, experience emotions. I mean, fear, joy, elation, victory, you know, that they wouldn't have opportunities to normally in their day-to-day. You'd have to wait till somebody's scared to actually talk about, well, what does it mean to be scared, and what's that emotion, and is that valid? Whereas play and fairy tales and things like that allow us to experience emotions and then actually learn to deal with those emotions and understand what emotions are. We know that's really powerful for that. You know, other play environments, for example, we know that young children can't understand supply and demand. That mathematical idea is too difficult for them at an age of 5. Yet we also know that when they play shop and they start making things for the shop, and no one buys the things they've made because everybody's made the same paper swan or whatever they've made, that they can actually understand supply and demand. So we can understand that the environment that we create, particularly with play, provides different learning opportunities. And I think sometimes as educators, because we're so set in that maths curriculum that it's this, you've got to do your times tables, you've got to learn single digit, you've got to learn order, you know, the orders of numbers, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and it builds and builds and builds upon that. It only builds and builds upon that because that's the way we teach maths. And what Papert said is it doesn't have to work like that. If we have an environment that you can explore mathematics in, Logo and microworlds, then children can learn at different rates and learn totally different things than they can learn in the classroom when they sit down with their counters. He was saying that kids can learn about angles and learn about geometry and learn about speed and learn about trajectory if they have the right environment, whereas we think they need to learn number lines first and they need to learn this, and that's all that they're capable of. So when we look at those things, we can start getting really, really excited about what the coding environment offers. And we need to take that. So we almost need to take off our curriculum hats and say that these things are set in stone. We need to learn this, we need to learn this, we need to learn this, and actually say, what might a new learning, what might the outcomes or the opportunities or the developmental possibilities be when we immerse ourselves in the coding landscape? And I think for me, that's really, really exciting because, and I outlined that in the post, you know, and I outlined 4 big areas. You know, we talk about feedback. Everybody as a teacher knows how important feedback is in the classroom. We say that kids, you know, and in the classroom, there's 3 ways to get feedback generally. You know, we can put up a hand and say, please, can you help me with this? I don't understand. Or the teacher can look and say, hey, I can see you're off task or you're not doing well. I better go intervene and do something. Or we get feedback when we hand it in, you know, at the end, and we get, oh no, that wasn't right, or yes, that was fantastic work, Richard. Whereas programming, you know, and other environments too, but programming is what we're talking about now, really allows us to get feedback continually as we're doing. You know, that when you program the Logo turtle, you type in a code, straight away it does it. You know, when you program for the web, you've got lots of, and I outline in the post, lots of ways to get feedback. You know, programming, for example, test-driven development is a big thing that's come in the last 10 years or so, where rather than writing code, you write a test for your code first, and you say, this is what I expect my code to do. If it works, it'll get this. If it doesn't work, it won't get this. And then they write the code. So it changes the paradigm of what we mean for feedback, you know, and we also see that in lots of different ways. So coding does create an environment, just like Microworlds creates an environment, just like if we go to France, there's an environment where we can learn French really well. Just like if we go to the golf course, there's a wonderful environment for us to learn golf. Just like if we go to the ocean with a surfboard under our arm, there's a wonderful environment to learn about surfing. Yet if we go to that golf course with the surfboard under our arm, we're not going to learn much about surfing. So coding has uniquely different developmental possibilities, just like the ocean has uniquely different developmental possibilities, just like the golf course, just like France, just like play. And so I think when we as educators look at coding, we need to, rather than seeing it as scripts, and it's really, you know, it's important to maybe learn the if-then conditionals and loops and what a variable is and what an integer is and how we do strings and how we split, and all those things are really useful. But we also need to come on with our eyes of saying, this is a brand new environment and what are the development possibilities? And I think when we do that, we get pretty excited.
I love that thinking. It's, you know, in an earlier interview, I spoke with Tom Lynch, and he said, you know, coding was a language, and I really value your insight that it's the environment. You know, the environment, we can do whatever we want to, and there's an opportunity to have real-time feedback and feedback built into learning. So, you know, sometimes in our classrooms, we don't like to try and fail, you know, and sometimes play doesn't really, you know, resonate with a lot of people when we think about the classroom. But with this, it's okay, and it's acceptable, and it's what you want, and it's more authentic to real life to be able to say, okay, I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to figure out what happened, and I'm going to try again. As opposed to many of our classrooms, it's like, okay, answer these 10 questions, got it done. Oh, good. Now move on to the next 10. You know, okay, yes, you learned. There's no, you know, if we were to say, okay, try it and see if it works or if it doesn't. And if it doesn't work, you're going to try again. A lot of students, regardless of age, would wonder why. We're trying again and again, you know, should be able to just master it immediately. So, I mean, you must be excited. There's a lot of buzz now about coding in the classroom, and here in the US, you know, the government is, you know, talking about multiple millions of dollars and billions of dollars to bring coding and programming into the classroom. You know, you talked about that excitement about bringing coding into instruction. Do you have concerns about just bringing it in and making it a part of the classroom?
Oh, of course. I think I'm not up with, I did hear about this 4 billion or whatever it was announced yesterday or the day before. But here in Melbourne, in Victoria and Australia, we have a long, wonderfully bad history of rolling out wonderful tech initiatives with much fanfare and not really providing teachers with the professional development that they need, or with really why are we doing this. And that's why I wanted to write the post, because we've got it here in Australia, we've got the Australian curriculum now, coding starting to be mandated, and we've got things from our governments that are, you know, the same sort of messages are coming from our governments that are coming from the US government, and I think that's probably the case of around the world and lots of other places. And if it's not, it will be soon. It's a bit like 10 years ago, schools could, and possibly universities could sort of say, hey, I'm going to hold off on this laptop one-to-one. We probably don't need to do it. We're going to find out now. It's not if, it's when, you know. Yeah. And I think, you know, you can't as a school, and there's very few schools that don't have laptops or iPads or whatever, you know, one-to-one. And if they don't have it, it's not if, it's when. And I think coding is probably almost going the same way. It's not if, but when. You know, if we're not doing it, we're going to be doing it in the future, you know, whether that's next year or 5 years or 10 years. I think most people would say, hey, yes, it's coming. But how do we support teachers? And if it's just teachers who don't feel confident, and teachers who feel that they need to be the expert, and teachers who feel that they need to tick off things that students need to do, I think that often runs a real risk that teachers will dumb it down, that will miss the point, that will maybe even take the love of it from, I think sometimes here in Melbourne, for example, we've tied down laptops so much. We've banned social media, we've banned this, we've banned that. Some schools even trying to ban it at home, and we suck the joy out of a laptop. All of a sudden this kid's got this wonderful device to connect them to the world, and what do? We disconnect them, and we put down, just academic programs that they can use and academic games, and we ban games because games are trivial, and we ruin the joy of laptops. Yes, there's a real risk that we could do that to coding, that rather than it being an environment where kids can solve their own problems, it can be an environment where kids have to do meaningless tasks that tick off something in the curriculum, and that 25, 30 kids in a classroom are all doing the same thing and all working on a problem that was solved last year or solved 10 years ago, and we all know it becomes like doing a science experiment that's been done 1,000 times before, like we all did when we were at school with our Bunsen burners. And I would hate if coding became that, and that's a real worry. And I think the secret is, I think that what we've got to do is ask why are we doing it. So in one way, the person in me who believes everybody should code and thinks it's a wonderful opportunity. In one way, when people say, why should we do this, and coding's stupid and coding's a fad and can't they learn it other ways? In one way, that gets the bristles on my neck up. But another way, I realise that's the important debate that we need to have. And we need to have that debate so people can understand why and what it offers. And I think without that, we do run a very big risk here in Australia and probably there in the US as well.
Yeah, that's the challenge. I mean, it runs contrary to your analogy before, saying, okay, well, if you want to, you can go to France and learn French, you can go to the beach with the surfboard and learn how to surf. You don't want it to be, okay, go to the classroom, here's a Ziploc bag, here's a plastic bag full of sand, here's a picture of, a wave, here's a picture of you on a surfboard,
That's right.
okay, now you know surf. Now you know what it means to surf. And it's like, no, that's not really what they were getting at.
That's right. And the other thing too is, because we see everything as skills, and I really don't like the language that's come in over the last couple of years of soft skills personally, because we're trying to say, how can we package up the new stuff in a way that we can understand, and a way that we can label, and a way that we can teach. To be a surfer is not just the ability to ride a wave, but there's a thing about the surfing culture, and to enjoy surfing and to understand about being motivated to find a new break. And to be a golfer is not just about being able to hit a driving, golf ball. We could go to the driving range and you could hit it straight, but being a golfer is making decisions as you go around the golf course. Being a reader is not just about being able to decode words so that you can read the book. It's actually developing a love of reading and a way that you will share things with ideas and discuss books. That's what we want to develop in our students, and as we teach them to read, a love of reading. That's what a reader is, who desperately wants to get the book and wants to communicate, and actually then starts getting shared meaning with other people because they enjoy books. And so we can't just think of the skills and the knowledge and as that being a coder, or that being a reader, or that being a surfer. We need to understand, what are the motivations? What are the characteristics that make somebody a surfer or a reader? What are the sources that they draw on? What are the sort of things that they produce? What's the end point of reading, or the end point of surfing, or the end point of coding? Yet when we like to reduce it as skills and soft skills, we miss really what's the important thing, and we do that with reading.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the tools? What are the practices?
Yeah. And so it's not just about being able to decode, being literate. It's about building a love of reading. We all want our kids to actually have a love of reading, and actually be able to engage in discussions about books that they love. And I think coding, and the post I wrote was suggesting that coding is the vanguard of modern learning. And I don't, and it's an unfinished post. I wanted to publish it before the Australian school year, because I really think my current view, and maybe this is outside the scope of our discussion, is that we should be developing lifelong learners. And that's easy to say, and what that means. And I think you look at coding, and to be a coder or a developer now, you need to continually learn, because the pace at which the coding job, career, profession is changing. The web is changing so much. The devices that people are using are getting faster, or they're changing sizes, or they're introducing swipe or touch or this. And people are discovering new ways that we interact with the devices. They're studying, you know, whether it's the speed of the internet speeds up, or we're going to developed countries, less developed countries, and the speed of the internet is really slow. Or whether it's, you know, about social, or whether it's about bots is the new thing this year, and then we invent new. The environment just changes so regularly. But it's not just coding. I think most jobs, you know, entrepreneurship is the same way. You know, that's become all about learning. You know, personal knowledge management. How, what's his name, Josh, you know, says learning is the work and the work is learning. And I think that's for most, you know, you can't be a marketing person now. Learning changes continually with social media and everything like that. I think, you know, and as educators too, we're asked to change. We're asked to say, hey, coding is important now, you're meant to do it. Or digital multi-literacies, new literacies are important. They need to change. So I think it's true that most jobs are requiring us to change and be ongoing learners. And I think that's going to be even more important. And I think all the stats say that too. So the question is, what is a lifelong learner? And more, I'm thinking that a lifelong learner is a pedagogue, a person who understands how we learn and what learning is and how we learn best and the best way to learn. And I think coding is, because of its rapidly changing environment and because of the ability that coders have to make the new tools. So what we're seeing in coding is not only that the environment's changing, not only the philosophy is changing, not only the infrastructure is changing. We're seeing the philosophies about what development is and what good coding is and how we solve problems is changing. And it's changing at such a rapid pace because of all those things. But what's really exciting is that we're making new tools, and they're making new tools to actually improve the profession. And to me, that's a perfect environment for saying, what does it mean to be a learner in that environment? What does it mean to keep up with that environment? What does it mean to understand the big picture of what's going on, rather than this is the latest tool that's in that? And so for me, that's what's, you know, incredibly exciting. And I would suggest any educator that says what is lifelong learning should do a case study on coding, because to me it's just absolutely fascinating the way what's happening out there in that ecosystem, in that community, you know, and it's not isolated, it's changing. And so I think to understand learning, it's great to see what they're doing. It's great to also see what entrepreneurs are doing. You know, it's great to see what design thinkers are doing. It's great to see what personal knowledge managers are doing. But I think coding, because of their ability to make tools, is really unique. And I think for us as educators and schools generally, we're poor for the fact that our tools are thrust on us probably. You know, whereas coders make their own tools, our tools are generally made for us by other people, by companies saying, this is what we think your problem is, and here we're trying to solve it. Whereas coders say, I've got a problem, I'm going to make a tool. And that tool is going to solve my problem, and I'm going to have increased capacity. And I think it would be wonderful, and maybe this is total utopia, if educators could create their tools. You know, imagine if educators could create their tools and say, I've got a classroom problem, I've got a learning problem, I can create a tool to solve it. And I think down the track, if most of us could code, and code to a level where we could create our own tools to solve our own problems, learning problems, I think that would be game changing. You know, I think that would help us get to where I think as educators we all want to get to and know we could get to in our biggest dreams.
Yeah, I agree with you 150%. That's part of the challenge, is that in my previous institution, I developed and was facilitating a program where, you know, you'd have teachers and you would give them the theories and principles and practices of bringing technology into the classroom. But then I also wanted them to understand and you know, get the nuts and bolts and the how to build and make things happen. And I said that, you know, you need to be able to hack together your own system. You know, you have to not just accept the tools. Sometimes there's this mindset that, you know, there's an app out there that will change or do what it is that you want to do in your classroom. I also think that, you know, I've got I've got 2 young kids, and, you know, I work often, in higher ed, but I also do a lot in K-12. And part of the challenge is that with, I like to bring different technologies in the classroom, and the assumption is that a lot of these kids might not go out and be coders in their future, but I want them to understand that when they sit down to use an app or play a video game, or they're watching TV and there's an animation or something happens, or their comics, or pretty much most of our life, that there is language behind it. There's that environment behind it that's making all of this happen. And increasingly, as we see, in post-Snowden era, we see that governments and businesses are tracking us, and the world is increasingly digitized. I think it's important, my two kids, I want them to know, and I want all of my teachers that I work with and my students I work with to know that, as you use these tools and these spaces and these devices, understand what's happening behind the scenes. So, I mean, right now we're at a certain point, that we have to make sense of this data, but in the future, I can see it only getting, in many ways worse, and I want my son to be able to sit there and read code and make sense of it and understand, okay, well, this is the data I'm giving up, or this is what's happening, or this is, I didn't see this part where they're hiding in there that, this person was watching what I was doing. That's freedom. That's real literacy.
Yeah. Oh, it's totally true. And it's the same for academia. There's been controversy over the very lately about academia edu, and about what does it mean to have your software, your papers and things, and what are their motive. And before that, it's Turnitin. These tools that universities and academics have been relying on, and increasingly relying on. We're saying, well, what are the tools if we'd created them for ourselves? Would they be different tools? What would they do? And that's a really important question for academia to have, and to say, rather than saying the tools need to be made for us, how can we make, if we made the tools, what would they look like and what would they do? And sometimes, and I was going to say the other thing too is, lots of schools do make their own frameworks, pedagogical models, conceptual tools, and they're really powerful. And I think, a lot of the schools that are on the forefront, and academics do it all the time, make a new conceptual tool, a framework, and make those sort of conceptual tools. I think, and they're really powerful, but I think coding tools are also, maybe a next step up, or also another powerful thing that we can have in our toolkit, as well as making frameworks. Because, and I'm from the Vygotsky school of, cultural historical theory of development too. And, he sees tools as being primary for development. Our use of tools become a sign of development. And so sometimes we go and say, well, you hear people say, it's just a tool, the laptop's just a tool, technology is just a tool, pedagogy is what matter. And that's true to a point, but it's misleading, because the tools make the pedagogical possible, and the tools provide new pedagogical possibilities, and the tools provide new developmental possibilities. If I stand on a ladder, I can reach things that are out of reach. That's a new developmental possibility. If I have a tool that allows me to do things, that's a new developmental possibility. And when I use that continually, when I walk around with my ladder, I'm now as if I was 7 foot tall. I've developed to be in my capacity to do things when I have a tool that I can use, continually, and integrate it into my practice. My developmental possibilities change, and coding really is the most powerful tool we've got. And so I think we need to understand what it is, what the role tools play. And I think maybe our progressive linear curriculum have devalued tools in the role of development, and maybe the way we see development as being such a linear maturing of skills and knowledge has allowed us to devalue tools. And I think hopefully we can now say we've got such powerful tools. Let's actually start looking back and saying, well, what role do tools play in development, and how can we actually start reframing development to something that's more authentic to what we really know.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's with the tools you can, we could operationalize learning. It goes back to the piece about, going to France or going to the beach.
Yes.
Now we can create we can not only provide evidence of learning, but we can operationalize it and create new learning and new tools. In your post, you brought up another point that I was really intrigued by. Is, I don't want to get the quote exactly right, just to not muddle your words. You said that coding may enable development that is not possible without coding. And I was really intrigued by that because, with a lot of my colleagues, they'll suggest that, the thinking, or the participatory experiences, that's what you really want, or the algorithmic thinking, or problem solving. What were you getting at with that point? What knowledge, skills, dispositions can we pick up with coding? And then these are things that wouldn't be possible without the use of coding and instruction.
I would talk to a bit about those sort of ideas, and I think it is the tools, the environment. So we started talking about at the start, play allows 5-year-olds to understand supply and demand. The textbook way we teach maths does not allow students to understand supply and demand. The golf course doesn't allow us to learn how to surf. It doesn't provide that. So when you say what does it be, learn how to be a learner, if we say that developmental possibilities, the goal of schooling, and I know, we have educational goals. These are the knowledge that we need to prepare. We have social goals. This needs to be a citizen. We have goals around being a creative individual. If we want to say what's the purpose of education, there's these 3 broad goals that we say, and increasingly we're saying, that we need to be lifelong learners because that's the work skills they're going to need, and that's the way they're going to be able to achieve things. I think the nature of learning is changing rapidly. It used to be that we could go to definitive sources. It used to be that we could go to the textbook. We used to be that the teacher was the definitive source. It's changed rapidly in that we can now go to Wikipedia and draw the source. But it's also changed rapidly. Social media, for example, changed that I can now share that I'm on Twitter, that I'm talking to you, and somebody can intervene and say, hey, you should ask him this. Mm-hmm. So the way that people can intervene changes the nature of learning. It changes once we can actually share our attention, what we're doing. So every new technology changes the nature of learning. And so for me, for coding, does allow us to, yes, do computationally complex things, and does allow us logic schemes and all those things that people talk, and the secret handshake of the 70s and 80s with programming, with computational thinking that's come out of, I guess, the Papert work still does draw on, and those things are important. Logical thinking like, working through procedures and understanding all that logic that really makes a background bone of coding is important. But I would love Papert to be able to talk about the social aspect and the remixing, to be able to build upon other people's work. That started with coding. Open source code came out of coding. We need to share, and we can't copyright a if-then statement, and we can't copyright the for loop or the when statement, and we can't copyright the trash bin or the windows or the coding and programming would have been worse off if we'd copyrighted those things. And Creative Commons was built to say, this is the way we believe coding and learning environments should work. And often our students, and you probably talk about this a lot in your work, is say, how do we rectify those ideas about coding and digital things to other mediums like YouTube videos or sound files or other things that we can share digitally, whereas coding has got a culture that says, this can't work unless it's free and open. And the majority of code is free and open with open source licenses. And this is how we're going to organize it. And then we've seen that build off into Creative Commons licensing for other things. Because we recognize that remixing allows us to not only just save time by building upon other people's code. The whole point of remixing, reusing code isn't that you're saving a day because that's a day's worth of code. The idea of a remix, or building on other people's code, or using a design pattern, or importing a library, or using a programming framework, is that it allows you to code at a level you couldn't without those things. So it's not just a time saver. It gives you a base that is higher than the base you have without those things. And People don't understand that, and I don't know, and I'm not. You can probably tell me whether you believe that's the same with remixing a YouTube video or remixing a story, you know, a narrative a structure, or building upon some other creative work that's not coding. I'd like to know your opinion on that. But my opinion is that it's not just a time saver. It increases developmental possibilities about what you can create because you can build upon that. Just like the philosophies now that, and I talk about this in the post, you know, we've seen in web programming over the last couple of years, we've seen the philosophies change, you know, completely. The big tool, the library that everybody built upon 5 years ago was jQuery. And that used practices and it sped up and it did all those things I just talked about. It meant that you could do wonderfully complex, beautiful things in the browser with much less code than if you wrote it yourself, and at a complexity that you couldn't do as a coder by yourself. So it increased that. But then what happened is people said, hey, that's not the best way to code. That's producing all these problems. And we went to single page. We also had the need for more web apps because people are now looking at code on a phone. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just the tools changed, the philosophy changed. So when we made a shift from jQuery to React, not to React, to Angular and Backbone and Ember.js, which were these single page, it wasn't just a change in the tools that increased the development of possibilities. It was a change in the philosophies about what we believed good coding practices were, what we believed about the way that code should run quick, what we believe about code that should have errors, and how we. So it was a philosophical change. The use of the tools, when the tools changed, the philosophies changed. And if we stayed with jQuery, and then those tools stayed for a while, and then we went off and Facebook invented React for a bunch of reasons, and all of a sudden the philosophies changed. And so much so that when Facebook released React, it actually didn't just release the code, it released a philosophy. And so you can actually go and read the philosophy documentations that go with the code, with the library that you can reuse. And so answering your question in a really long-winded way is that when you have tools such as those things, whether it's remixing tools or whether it's libraries that are philosophy-based, or I call them opinionated, other people call them opinionated. When you have an opinionated tool, all of a sudden you're using a tool that's directing you to act in a whole new way. And when you act in a whole new way, the developmental possibilities totally change, you know. And so all of a sudden, maybe that's the same for surfing too. I'm not really a surfer, but when we go to longboards and shortboards and everything like that, I don't know whether that's the same. But when the tools change and the tools have a philosophy with them, that totally changes what's possible. And so coding does allow us to do those things and does us allow to work within those philosophies. But I also think what's wonderful about it is that it enables us to learn about learning. Because those coders that are going through those cycles, and we're talking about 5 years in web development, which probably is, you know, when we think of how long we've had web and how long we've had the iPhone and smartphones, 5 years is probably eternity. The change that's happened in web development in 5 years has been enormous. And it's not just change in tools, it's a change in philosophy, and it's a change in how people work, and it's a change in how people believe they should work effectively. And because that environment is changing so rapidly, because the tools that people are using to work in that environment are created by the people themselves, that's why I think learning is just like, web development and other coding is just a wonderful fertile ground for learning at the moment, because yeah, sure, lots is happening in entrepreneurship, for example. There's lots happening with the way that entrepreneurs are working and the tools they're using and the philosophies that drive them. You know, sure, there's probably lots of things that are changing in marketing. Journalism is another thing that's getting a massive shake-up. But coding is happening really, really fast. And I think that's what's really unique about coding at the moment. And I think that's why it's pretty exciting. And that's why I think educators that are pedagogues and educators that are interested in learning about learning should look at.
Did you freeze up? I think you froze up. Come on, YouTube, pull out. Come on, YouTube. think it froze up. Let's see. On YouTube. There he is.
Sorry,
No,
that's
not a
my
problem.
internet.
There's a hiccup and then it froze up. Yeah, I think it's I going back to the remix and mashup piece real quickly. I agree with you. I don't think it's a I love remix mashup culture. I try to remix and I try to rewrite you know, using digital media in any way possible. And for me, it's not about time. It's more about you know, seeing what other people can create and how they think, and that motivates me. Like you know, and it's not about you know, and I don't code and I'm not remixing code, but I am looking at, you know, audio podcasts from others and video from others, and I'm, you know, and I'll take a lot of Creative Commons licensed video and, you know, take 15 videos and chop them all up into minute slices and remix it into a completely new video and put it out there. And so it's seeing what other people's create and then finding themes that resonate with me and chopping those up and using those and creating something new. I also think there's a lot of power in remix and mashup. You know, so if there is websites out there that have info that you don't agree with, now we live in a world where you can, you know, remix or recreate that pretty easily. You know, and a lot of power that doesn't exist in the typical answer this question on the test classroom. So I mean, so wrapping up, one of the last questions, and I really appreciate it. It's this discussion is going to have me thinking for a long time. You know, so let's say I'm an educator. The primary audience of this is secondary, you know, so we're dealing, you know, young adults, adolescents up through higher ed, and they look at this and they say, okay, I'm interested. I really want to make this happen. You know, where do people start? Like, what's the first step tomorrow? And in that context, I'm really intrigued by another piece from the post. You talked about, you know, we need loose learning environments. So how do we start, and what are those loose learning environments?
Well, I'll tell you what they're not. I think the danger is that when we go coding, we find an app, an education-aimed app that teaches how to coding. The Khan Academy teacher coding is a woeful thing. They said they built on Brett Victor's ideas, and then Brett Victor wrote a long post explaining why they're not his ideas. So if you want, and you look up Brett Victor, who's warriordream.com, learnable programming. If you want to know about programming, look at Brett. Wonderful idea about how we learn programming. But for example, in the post, I talk about Scratch is great, for example, that it lets you at least the sprites or the individual blocks. It does let you save them and import them, export and import them. So you can do some of that remix. When I talk about loose, is you need to do that. So I think Scratch is not a bad thing. I think some of the education apps are okay. I think Scratch is okay. Most of the other ones are so closed off that you can't remix. You can't do that. I think the other thing, Minecraft is a wonderful environment for coding, you know, and it becoming more and more, and hopefully Microsoft's purchase of it increases that, doesn't diminish that. Redstone programming, what people make in Minecraft for the Redstone programming and the command blocks, not to mention the mods, and, you know, there's a jQuery mod that you can write JavaScript code to build wonderful structures. But what you can do now in the command blocks, and 1.9's hopefully out soon. They've been promising that for a long time. They're changing it, making the command blocks even more powerful, because you can write code and do wonderful things. But getting back to your question, what's a loose environment? The Minecraft is a great example of that, because the Minecraft programming, whether it be Redstone blocks or whether it be command blocks or whether it be mods, has this wonderful loose environment, because most of it, while it's not the best, you can't really import code. You can copy and paste text. for the command blocks. You can't really import, you can't do the things I talked about, Scratch, export a command block that's got programming, or export your wonderful Redstone machine that creates, automatically does this stuff. And if you don't know about Redstone, Redstone is, well, it's a great example of what we're talking about before, because I did programming at high school a long time ago, and we learned about logic gates in year 11 when I was 16 and 17. Now kids now learn about logic gates because we're developmentally ready the way we were taught logic gates, and we wrote them out, and ors and nots and XORs and all this sort of thing. And so, for example, it still sticks with me. I can't remember why. You write out this grid and this thing of, you drive into the driveway, this is
Oh, did it freeze up again? Come on, YouTube. Come on. Come on, YouTube. Keeps getting choked.
Sorry, Ian, this is me.
No, not a problem. Not a problem at all.
It's my broadband here. I apologise. Hopefully you can edit this.
No. Yeah, we'll clip out the middle part. So, so what's the for the teachers that are interested? Like, how do you start? Like, what's the first step to make this happen?
I think a great step would be to look what's happening around Scratch, or look what's happening around Minecraft. And when we talk about loose environments, the way people are communicating in Minecraft programming, because it doesn't have a lot of the things built in to actually be able to use code and share, except for the mods. But the mods to write in C are quite hard, probably beyond schools. But people are using YouTube. So you go to YouTube and you type in Redstone Minecraft creations, and you see wonderful examples of what people are creating with Redstone in Minecraft. And if you go to YouTube and type in Minecraft command blocks, you see, and the whole people have got excited about what they can create in Minecraft using command blocks and using Redstone, and they share it on YouTube. And that's what I'm talking about, loose environments, rather than us saying, here's our education app, we're going to learn coding, it's closed off, or it's Khan Academy step by step, or it's some other person who's made an app and decided to be able to sell that to all these schools, and it's just do this exercise. I would love to see, and I would encourage teachers to look at Minecraft, let kids explore what they can make with Redstone, let kids explore what they can make in command blocks, because it's really amazing what they can make. And a quick look in YouTube can show you what they can make in with Redstone and command blocks with Minecraft. And so I would encourage people that want to look at a broader understanding of coding to do that. And maybe Scratch is a little bit more easier or teacher friendly, but Scratch is another great one, because they've got, and that's made out of MIT, MIT's kindergarten playground, whatever it's called, Mitch Resnick, and that builds upon the legacy of Pappet's logo and Microworlds. The turtle's now become a cat. But that allows you to download other people's Scratch projects, remix them, build upon them, pull the sprites out, do that sort of thing too. So I think teachers who want to get into coding, from my personal opinion, is to look at Scratch or look at Minecraft and see what's happening there.
Yeah, it's a good starting place. So with that, I want to remind everybody that this is a piece that's supposed to be a supplement to the columns that we're putting out for the Journal of Adolescent Adult Literacy. We wanted to bring experts on to talk about the column and bring some depth and breadth to the discussion and figure out what this means for your classroom. I really appreciate the time to chat with you, Richard. Where can people find you online? Where do you hang out on the internet?
I hang out on Twitter, Richard Olsen, @Richard Olsen. I have a personal website, richardolsen.me. And the tools that I make, you can find the tool that I'm working on at the moment at the modernlearningcanvas.com. But I'm around, so pop in and say hi sometime.
Most definitely. So what I'll do is I'll put together this video. We'll put it up on in a blog post and share it out. I'll share the links to the original post that I read that motivated me to get in touch with Richard, and all the other links. So with that being said, please reach out to Richard, like you said, pop in and say hi. And hopefully this is of value to teachers as they watch, connect, and respond to us. So with that being said, we'll close out.